Okay, so in 2006, the New York Times published an article called "Fly Me to the Moon and Let Me Profit on My Stocks." The idea is that the moon, lunar cycles in particular, can have an impact on the stock market. So stock markets perform better or worse depending on where we are in the lunar cycle. Now you're probably thinking, in 2023, that's probably sounding like a bit of a stretch. The moon having an impact on our money? Really? So let's look into it. Okay, so you need to know about this study, and it's called The Lunar Cycle Effects in Stock Returns. It was published by this professor in the University of Michigan. So this is where they discovered that the stock market returns are generally higher around new moons rather than full moons. They analyzed the data from about 48 countries over a period of 3 decades, and they found this consistent pattern, and that is stocks tend to perform better during the 2 weeks following a new moon, and then the returns tend to be lower in the 2 weeks following a full moon. And this lunar effect seems to hold true across different countries and industries. And the difference in prices during these periods, well, that's quite shocking as well. According to this New York Times article, it's as much as 10% a year on average, depending on the stock index and the number of decades that were studied. And the researchers found that there was a lunar effect presence in all major US stock indexes over their history. So this includes the Dow Jones Industrial Average all the way back to its start in 1896. So why does this happen? The leading theory is that the moon affects our mood. By the way, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. It helps me out tremendously. Okay, as I was saying, the moon has an effect on how we feel, and there are some studies that hint that a full moon can actually increase our pessimism. It also increases our tendency to feel depressed. So it's possible to take a leap from there and assume that investors may be more inclined to stay out of the stock market during that time. And the fact is that these price fluctuations that we see because of the lunar effect, it's mostly seen in small cap stocks. There's this other study called "Are Investors Moonstruck? The Lunar Phases and Stock Returns?" And the author of this study suggests that things like this, like the lunar effect, probably won't impact large institutional investors. Individuals, on the other hand, they hold the small cap stocks and are therefore more likely to be affected by the lunar cycle. But institutional investors, they don't really go for the small stocks, so you don't really see the large cap stocks being impacted that much. So all the more reason to see why this theory could actually hold water. Okay, so it's not just the stock market. There are actually some studies out there that show that the moon can have an effect on consumer behavior as well. Some shop owners, like retailers, they have this theory, it's called the full moon effect, and they think that it can impact how customers buy. They think that customers spend more money during the full moon. I mean, if you remember back in the video, we talked about how the full moon can increase a sense of depression, and some retail therapy can perhaps be helpful during that time. And that's why we perhaps see some of these effects. It's all conjecture at this point, honestly, but apparently this trend has been observed in various other places like restaurants, bars, and other entertainment venues. Alright, so we've talked about the interesting studies and how the stock markets change based on lunar cycles, and we also talked about how individuals get impacted because of the lunar cycles, and that changes how we invest or buy things. But the real question is, why? Why does this happen? And the frustrating answer is that nobody really knows for sure. There are some researchers who believe that the moon's gravitational pull and the way that it affects the Earth's electromagnetic field might play a role in influencing human emotions and decision making. So that could be a causation, but then this article shows that it all probably comes down to sleep. The full moon, for various reasons, some of which is scientifically backed honestly, can impact a person's sleep, and therefore their moods. Sleep is such a fundamental part of our being that any disruptions in its patterns can cause changes. And then you have cultural norms, beliefs, and all that stuff can also play a role. It's a possibility that the moon's phases can have a psychological impact on individuals, causing them to act in certain ways that are based on their own cultural beliefs and expectations. Okay, so we understand a bit more about why this stuff happens, but the real question is, what do we do with this information? I mean, should we try to time the markets based on the various phases of the moon and invest accordingly? Or do we plan to stay put at home during a full moon to stop ourselves from spending too much money? I mean, not really. These are all hypotheses. There are a lot of research and studies done behind them, but none of them can really pinpoint to a particular financial outcome. Human beings have long been wired to find patterns and meanings in things that don't necessarily fit. Sometimes they make sense and sometimes they don't. I think that's how we started looking at the moon, at the stars and the night sky. We try to find meaning in these things, and in our mind we try to link them up with things that are happening around us, like the stock market or how much money we're spending. I think it's nice to think about these things sometimes, to ponder or to imagine, to find studies and research that make us think about why we think about these various topics and how they could ever come together. But more often than not, it should just be kept at that, just fun, interesting concepts to think about or to imagine. But when it comes to investments or spending habits, then don't try to find patterns or some magical beliefs or some trends. Bring yourself down to earth. Be realistic, learn, and don't make decisions based on emotions or other superstitious influences. And in case matching your investments to the cycles of the moon doesn't work, and let's face it, it probably won't, you might think to yourself, hey, let me start a business. But before you go down that path, you should watch this video that I made about a crucial mistake most people make when they're going down the entrepreneurship route. So remember to subscribe, watch that video, and thanks again for watching. See you soon.